My name is Jabin Ahmed. I grew up in State Street in the early 2000s. My family moved here when I was 2 years old from New York City, and then they shortly after that bought a house on State Street. And growing up, I didn't really see it as very different. To me, State Street was Hudson. When you're younger, like that's your like a street is your whole world, right? So I used to ride my bike up and down State Street around the corner. There's a hill at the end of State Street that goes. It's really steep. I remember sneaking there whenever my mom would fall asleep, and like endless hours of just like riding my bike non-stop, and then like saving up with friends to go buy like candy and chips and like putting it all together and eating it. And I think it wasn't until I got older that I realized like, State Street had like its own reputation, and like Columbia Street had its own reputation of what it was. And so like, when I would go to school, a lot of people would assume that I was from like the suburbs, or like that I was from a different part of Hudson because of the way I would speak. And so when I would tell them that I was from Hudson, they would say like, oh, you don't sound like you're from Hudson, or you don't sound like you're from State Street. And I really didn't understand what that meant. And so when I started working, professionally, or like when I got older, I realized like what they meant was like, you don't sound like you're someone from a rural part of Hudson, or you don't look like you're someone from a rural part of Hudson, or like you don't present yourself as that. When I started working at a school that was on Warren Street Academy, it's closed now, but it was a school for at-risk youth school, for youth who are at risk. They also assumed that I wasn't from Hudson. So when I told them like, hey, I grew up on State Street, I still live on State Street, it kind of brought me like a lot of credit. Like, I gave me a lot of connection to them, because they realized like, okay, she grew up around the same atmosphere that we did. Like, yes, she grew up seeing people, getting arrested. She grew up seeing people like, being torn out of their homes. But at the same time, she also grew up in like the culture of Hudson that isn't presented to tourists, that isn't presented to like people who don't live here and grow up here. So I think I've learned about State Street in different phases, if that makes sense. And I still feel very much comfortable there. My parents still leave the door wide open when they go to sleep, and people have actually walked into our house in the middle of the night thinking it's their house, but I've never felt unsafe there. And I think it's funny because a lot of people still assume that, State Street is unsafe, or that like people are at risk. And I know there's been like a lot of shootings around town and stuff like that, but like for some reason I've never felt like I was at risk, or that something was happening to me. As a teenager, I remember walking with my sisters and aunts in the middle of the night on State Street, Warren Street, all throughout Hudson, and I've never been harassed or like threatened or hurt, or felt that I was in danger, if that makes sense. And so I think that's the beauty of it. Like, I guess when it's your space, like like it's genuine, and like how it is. I don't live on State Street anymore. I really wish I did. I couldn't afford to buy a house there. I live in Greenport, but I do, drive past like where I used to walk every day, and it's still nostalgic. Just like seeing the houses change, seeing new families come in, seeing new kids, reclaiming State Street. And it's really beautiful.